Okay, I'm just doing a quick video to show how to define and attach connectors in the Easy-Wire software. This will give you an idea of the different options you have in the software for this step, and it's a necessary step in the programming, even if you're going to import instructions. So we're going to do this real quick, but here we go. Create a test. And then you may remember from demo or looking at the harness board that I brought in that time, that we're bringing in connectors from the library. So I'm going to do a couple different options here, and you'll understand this as we go forward. So if I'm going to use the connectors that are on the front of the tester as the connectors, in other words, I'm not going to use the more typical approach of defining the connectors that are on the product. I just want to use the test point connectors. I happen to know that the AHED-64 is one of our adapters, but it's the adapter that matches the connector that's on the front of the CR tester. So I'm just going to pick that, and I'm going to bring one over. I'm also going to bring over that same connector in what is called a fast attach configuration, and we can go through how to create that, but for this purpose I just want to show you how that might help you in your setup. So I'm going to bring one of those over, and then for the more traditional approach, just we'll look at how that would normally be handled. So I'm just going to refine my connector, and we'll pick out this connector and bring it over. Okay, now in this window we have the ability to rename these default connectors. So the $J1, $J2, $J3 is what the software assigns just as a default. And we can leave it that way, and we might want to, just depending on how we're going to approach the test program setup. But just to show you how I can change that, I'm just going to click on Edit, and I'm going to change that reference to remove the $, and I'm going to call it J1 instead. So you'll see now that that reference has changed. In the program, we also have to go through the number 2 step here, attach. And this is, you may remember, something that we can do with the probe. We can also do it manually. I don't happen to have a tester attached right now, so you'd see that it's not giving me the probing action or option. So I'm just going to select without using the probe. And it brings up a graphic which you can't see because I have 2 screens and it's over to the other side. But I'm going to do this manually, so I'm just going to step through this, clicking through, or I can just keep saying OK here to get through all 64 points. And this is going to show us the advantage of setting up the fast attach connector, which we'll see next. Okay, so that attaches all 64 points to that default connector. I'm now going to pick the second connector, which I just put an extension here of FA, meaning it's a fast attach. The fast attach connector we create in the library. We teach it the pinout one time, then that information is stored in the library. So when I go to do the attach on a fast attach connector, I only have to attach the first point. So the software is smart enough to know, okay, all 64 lower points are attached, so we're going to start at point 65. We can change that if we want to, but in this case we're spot on. All I have to do is attach the first point. It knows where that is, it knows the pinout, so it automatically attached all 64. So you can see the advantage of having a fast attach connector. The D-sub is what would be the more traditional approach. This is going to have a graphic that matches the connector that's in the product rather than the default connector that's on the front of the tester. Again, there's a graphic off to the side here, which unfortunately I can't pull over, but you get the idea. and I can just click through this to give me all 15 points plus the shell. So that attached is a step that's also necessary. Now, in your circumstance, if you want to import instructions and you just want to use the connectors that are on the front of the CR tester as the default, which is the AHED-64, we can go back here to label points, and then this is where we would add our labels. Now these labels would have to match exactly any instruction labels that are going to be used on our import. And I don't have that information in front of me for your case, but let's just say that it was P3-001. I would say add label, and you can see down here where that's populated. The software is automatically going to try and help me with this process by automatically incrementing, and that's great if it's helpful, less so if it's not, but you can kind of see we can step through that, and then if it's going to change, we would have to change this to terminal board -1-001, for example, TB1, for example, and then add labels. That's a way of, I'll call it cheating or working around the defining connectors that are in the product and just using the default connectors that are on the front of the tester. And sometimes if you're importing instructions, it's easier to do this than it is to do the defining the connectors that are on the tester, and that's only helpful if you're not using the connector graphics. You're not going to use it for guided assembly. If we had the information available, these point labels, say you had an Excel file that showed how the product interface was wired. In other words, it showed in one column the Cirris test point, and in the other column the product label that you wanted to use. We could import that data. You can see that there's a text view here, and that shows us a warning sign that we're now going to go into something where there's not a syntax check like there is in the graphical. And you can see that it's a simple table here, but we could copy and paste that information basically from an Excel into this. There's a step you would have to take in the interim, but it's pretty straightforward, and I can show you how to do that. But that gives you a little bit of an idea of how all these pieces fit together. The define and attach are steps you have to go through, but that's pretty easy to do if you just want to use the default connectors on the front of the tester and then go backside with the labels. And especially easy if you set up a fast attach in the library. And I'll show you how to do that here. I'm just going to abandon those changes that I made. If we go into the connector registry, you can see, let's look for that AHED-64. Oh, that's because we're here in demo tests. All, and you can see that if I highlight that and right click on it, there's a thing called wiring pattern here. If I had the tester attached, then this would be optional. I could say set, and then that would allow me to probe through the points on the front of the tester to assign the wiring pattern that's going to be consistent throughout that type of connector. And since I'm using the connector that's on the front of the tester, I can set that up as a fast attach. And like I did in the sample that I just showed you, when you're attaching a fast attach connector, you only have to tell the software, tell the test program where the first point is, and it will fill in the library pattern for the rest of those 64 points. So that's why it's pretty useful to do that. I don't think it's in there as a default, but again, it's just a matter of carefully probing those points on the front of the tester to establish that pattern. When I do that, I usually start by selecting the connector I'm going to use in this case, and then copying it and renaming it with a FA extension. That way I know it's the same. I don't use the default connector for that pattern if in case I want it later for some reason. I make a new name that's easily identifiable, and I know it's a fast attach. Okay, so I hope that's helpful. I think that'll help. I'll call you guys in a few minutes.